the Holy Gospel according to St. John, the 8th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. First of all, thank you for having Ron and me come here to visit you today. It's nice to be here. Some of you may or may not know me or my family background, but my father was born in Needpath, which is kind of just around the corner from here. He was born in the same corner of the same room of the same house that my grandmother was born in. And so there are Stolsons from Needpath and Sardisons from Hodgeville, and I have connections all back here. So whenever I come to Swift Current, I kind of feel like I'm coming home in some way. So thanks for letting me come home for a while. And thank you for being here for worship today. You won't be surprised to know that by and large, I tend to worship with a younger crowd than is gathered here this morning, because I'm a chaplain at the university. And just so you know, if we were going to be worshiping the same way we worship at the Lutheran Campus Center in Saskatoon, at this point, all of us would be sitting on cushions in a circle on the floor. So if you want to come up and sit on the floor here, that's fine, and I'll feel right at home, and we'll worship together that way. But it's nice to be here with you today. So to continue. There's this woman I live with. We've been together for a little more than 25 years now, and the really great thing about being together for all that time is that you get really good ammunition to use in arguments. It's so tempting and so easy to say, "Oh yeah? Well, you've been acting this way for years now. You did the same thing then, and then, and then, and then there was that other time as well." And the scary thing is that when I say it to her, I'm right. And when she says it to me, which she doesn't do very often because she's more well-adjusted than I am, she's right too. There was a couple I knew once, and their relationship had almost ended when one of them had an affair with someone else who lived in their small little community. They worked out the troubles, they had forgiven each other, but even though they had forgiven, there was always this memory buried deep inside that could be brought back at any time if they needed it. If things got strange for them again, she could always say, "Remember what you did to me? Remember how you hurt me?" And he could always say, "Remember what it was like when I wasn't happy with you? It could happen again." I don't know if they ever did that. I doubt that they did. But the memory is always there, a haunting thing that lurks in the depths. And all of this happened in a small town, not much bigger than Needpath or Hodgeville, where no one forgets what someone else has done. And those whose failures have been as public as this one will always be looked at as having failed and been weak. A broken heart never forgets. A frustrated desire doesn't forget. A watchful community does not forget. We can always forgive. It's what we're called to do. But so often the most earnest forgiveness we can offer can just get rid of that memory. That memory that can turn sour, or cannot get rid of that memory. That memory that can turn sour and become a weapon. There are these students I live and work with. About 20,000 students on campus at the U of S, about 15 or 20 who hang around at the Lutheran Campus Center, on and on. They're as good as the rest of us at remembering what they've done and what's been done to them. And they also live in a system that never forgets. The pressure to perform for a student is always on. And if your average falls too low one too many times, you will be politely asked to leave. It happens to first or second or third year students. It happens to graduate students who come to Canada from faraway places, and their families and communities depend on them and support them and need them to do well. But the system doesn't forget if you've failed one too many times. If you've cheated on an exam or stolen someone else's work and called it your own, or just innocently copied material for a paper without quoting the source of the material, in short, if you've been academically dishonest, you could end up with a permanent record of that dishonesty. It could stay buried in your file forever, or someone somewhere might find it someday and they could say to you, I know what you did that time. And if you couldn't be trusted then, can you be trusted now? Or if you did something just silly or just plain wrong in a beer-fueled early September enthusiasm, that one dumb mistake could follow you forever. The system, even the nice system at a nice university in a kind prairie city, never forgets. That's what makes the reading from Jeremiah today so very strange. The short history lesson is that the people of Israel and Judah are being taken off into exile in a faraway country. They're forced by an occupying army to leave their home and go to live in a strange place as someone else's prisoners and someone else's subjects. The people have come to understand that they are in this situation because they have sinned against God. Jeremiah never holds back in insisting that the people's ruin is their own doing. Yet in the midst of that, God speaks through Jeremiah and says, I'm making a new covenant with these people. I'll write it on their hearts. They will know me, and I'll know them. I will forgive their wrongdoing and remember their sin no more. We live with the mistakes we make, the ways we have failed or the ways we have hurt and been hurt. They stay etched in our memories, and we know that we get ourselves into the messes that we make. And God says to Israel and Judah, God says to us, God says to students on a campus in a city to the northeast, I will forgive your wrongdoing, and I will remember your sin no more. You know, we kind of think of God as a bunch of different all things. God is all-powerful, God is all-knowing, and so on. The great good news of today is that we can add all-forgetting to that list. And that's more important than all those other ones. When God forgives, God forgets. The divine memory of sin is wiped clean. God forgets that we were ever at a distance from God, that we had ever done anything wrong or cheated or lied or wandered away with another. It's scandalous. But God gives up the power of remembering our wrongdoing and will never say, I remember what you did. God forgets sin once it's forgiven. God remembers the promise to give us life. God forgets sin, and God remembers only the love that God has for us and for all of God's people. God forgives and holds no power over us. We forgive and hold no power over one another. So we're set free from a haunting past. We are free from the bitterness and anger that comes from holding on to those memories. God forgives, God forgets, and we are free. The same thing happens when Jesus speaks about slaves and free and belonging to the household in the reading from John. Everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin, he says. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. If the Son makes you free, you will be free. But of course, we haven't been slaves, have we? Like those early people in earshot when Jesus speaks of freedom, who say, we're children of Abraham, we've never been slaves. We too insist that we are free. It's a free country, it's a democracy. We left slavery and poverty and scarcity behind in those other places to make our lives freely in this place. I work in a place at the university where we insist that we are free. At the foundation of all that a university does is the idea of academic freedom. And we in that place are free to think and say and study and explore freely whatever interests us. It's in the genetic makeup of a university. We've never been slaves. But like those people in earshot when Jesus speaks of freedom who say, we're children of Abraham, we've never been slaves, our memories are short and our understanding is thin. Do you remember what it was like to be a slave? Or have you never been a slave? Or have we forgotten that we too have been slaves, or that we are slaves? Certainly you've heard the talk, and we even began with some of it today. We talk about being slaves to sin. We just can't seem to get things right, or we just can't set ourselves free from these broken lives we live. We try to make things right and patch up what's wrong, but things never come out the way they should. We are slaves to sin, and we find ourselves caught again and again in the things that keep us from trusting God and caring for one another. Or maybe we could talk about being slaves to death, to this terrible something that looms ahead and makes us afraid or calls us to pretend it isn't even there. We could talk about being slaves to any number of things. Slaves to the things we're addicted to, like caffeine or alcohol or crack or power or wealth. Some are slaves to fashion. So many of us are slaves to debt that builds up sneakily over the years and eventually consumes us. We are slaves to voices we hear everywhere that say we have to earn more and spend more and borrow more and get more and be more, and then we'll be free. But we can never earn or spend or borrow or get enough. And of course, I work with students, 20,000 or so, or 15 or 20 who hang around at the campus center from time to time, and they find it so hard not to be slaves. Slaves to timetables, slaves to a course outline, slaves to expectations dumped on their shoulders by professors, by friends, by mom and dad, or in the worst way, slaves to the expectations they dump on themselves. We are slaves in all kinds of ways. There are habits we can't escape and things we have so much trouble quitting. We are slaves, but we forget. And here again comes the strange good news, the beautiful good news in this twist of memory, this divine forgetting, this granting of freedom that Jeremiah talks about. I was talking about this reading with a student one day, and after we sat for a few moments, the student said, if you set a slave free, you give up power over them. You can't tell them what to do anymore. You don't have any say in what they do. It's a risk. So while we do think, and rightly so, that we're slaves to sin, slaves to what we have done, always under the power of a distance from God that seems too great, we are free. We are not slaves. We might think that we're to be slaves of God, always trying to do the right thing so that we don't get kicked out of the household. Cook the food, serve the food, wait on the tables, clean up afterwards, make sure the chores are done, finally get some rest after the master and the household have no more demands for the day. And if we don't do it right, we're tossed out. But Jesus says a strange new thing. If the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. He gives up the kind of power over us that says, do this and that and do it right, or you're cast out to fend for yourself. He gives up the kind of power over us that says, I know what you did last summer. He forgets our sin, gives up power, comes into the world dressed in weakness, dies, and gives us life. And we are made free. And we are called to love and serve in the world, to love and serve with divine forgetfulness and the powerlessness of the Word made flesh. But we're no longer slaves at the table. We are told instead to pull up a chair and sit right down, for here in the household of faith, we are free, and God has given everything for us. We celebrate Reformation today. If we followed the calendar perfectly to the right day, we would have the celebration of Reformation at the same time that we little children are running around the neighborhood dressed as ghosts and princesses and pirates and loading up on candy. But we celebrate Reformation today, this Sunday. And it's not about starting a new church, and it has nothing to do with being better than those people over there, whoever those people might be. In fact, Reformation is somehow about an end to all of those old us people and those people games. The good news instead that has always been proclaimed and that the Reformation reminds us of once again is this: God forgets, Jesus gives up power, and we are made free. In a world where so few have so much power over so many, where we are all slaves to economies and ideologies that hurt and divide us and ultimately will fail us, a new way is given to us. God forgets our sin, and there are no more slaves. Jesus gives up power, and the table is set for all, and the gifts of God are given for all, and all are welcomed, and all are free. There's this woman I live with, and together this good news makes us free. There's this couple I once knew whose marriage was almost torn apart by the damage they had done to each other. And there's this couple I know whose marriage did finally come apart for the same reasons. And together, this good news that Jesus proclaims makes them and makes us free. There are these students I know, and you know some of them too. They get together at the corner of College and Wiggins in Saskatoon every now and then, and they laugh and they talk, and sometimes they cry, and they eat cookies, and they eat feasts, and they give one another bread and wine, the very real living presence of the one who makes us free. And together the good news of this day makes them free and makes us free. And if the Son makes you free, you will indeed be free. Amen.